Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ambassador, and all the organizers that make this, that made this event possible. I'm very happy to be here and to have the honor of speaking here today at this event that connects Canada and Germany, and thus also connects North America and Europe. First, I was asked to point out an European view on problems and the open society, migration and integration in a European view. So, first of all, I can say there is none. We have the European Union, but no European view. And you all know that, the organizers know that. So it seems to be okay that I will offer you today my view on the problems. And well, I will start immediately. We have little time, but I'm still thinking about your great lecture. I would like to start to discuss, but I have to make my lecture. Maybe later we can talk. So you can read it, us and them. What difference are we talking about? What I want to say is we have to talk about doing difference. So we decide what the difference is and who is us, or who are we. So I would talk about doing difference, and in the same time I would talk about expectations we have and which are related to the differences we make. I would discuss the liberal open society, so I will make the difference us, the defenders of the open society, and them, the enemies of the open society. So that's my us and them difference. And we all know that the champions and defenders of the open society ideal exist throughout the world, as well as the enemies of the open society exist throughout the world. They are found in Europe as well as in North America, and they are organized in global networks. I'm speaking not only about religious fundamentalism, but also about nationalist movements, right-wing populist movements, and right-wing extremism. Ironically, these groups which are against the open society could hardly be more diverse. It's a special kind of diversity, of course, but today we see it clearly that the liberal democracy is being questioned all over the world, and it's been most strongly questioned in the liberal states themselves. There are a few exceptions. In Canada and in Germany, we do not see that developments, not in the same extent, not yet. Both countries are still relatively open. But I think we are dealing with an essential trend of our times, maybe an essential characteristic of the 21st century. What are the problems of the open society? My thesis is the open society and the liberal democracy are no longer merely ideas, they have become reality. And this reality appears to create problems. We have come to understand what liberalism and globalization mean. We see the effects before our very eyes, and many people, an increasing number of people, do not like what they see. The idea was apparently more attractive when it was merely a theory, when it only existed on paper. But as this ideal has become reality, people are having more problems with it. And for this reason, we see the growth of anti-liberal movements wherever the open society has become reality. It seems strange, but I think the problem is actually the openness itself. In other words, the problem we are facing are simply the side effects of a very successful development. So what do I mean if I use, in using the term openness? Liberal states strive toward openness, and openness both within and outside. Inside openness comprises civil rights for all citizens and even the recognition of human rights for those people who are not citizens. It includes anti-discrimination policy for disadvantaged groups, for women, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, for people with disabilities, and so on. All this has to do with the openness inside. The openness to the outside can be summarized with the term globalization. And globalization applies not only to the economy, production, trade, transportation, monetary flows, but also to the communication of people and to the movement of people in the sense of tourism as well as migration. Openness within and outside of a country's borders converge at one particular point, a particular group of people, migrants. Or actually, one could say that migration stands for the openness to the outside, while integration stands for the openness inside, the inner openness. That's why the most open societies are those with the most diverse population. They are in and of themselves global, or as I like to say in German, Globalität vor Ort. So you can translate it, globality exists locally, or localized globality. So not only the world has become a village, the world may also be united within villages, usually in major cities in Europe, in Western Europe, and in North American countries. So openness, liberalism, both within and outside of a country's borders, had spread at an accelerated rate in the last decades, and in a way which nobody could have previously imagined. If you read the old books about liberalism and open society, I think those people who wrote those books could not imagine that the open society, in a way like we live it today, that they had imagined that this would be reality one day. 100 years ago, there was not one single country that was a free land for all people, independent of skin color, religion, gender, or sexual preference, and I'm not sure that such a country existed 50 years ago. This is very new. Today we have a multitude of such countries, liberal democracies, the equality of all people, the open society. All of this has increasingly become reality, not perfect, but much better than ever before, and it has created a complexity which in turn fuels counter movements. And these counter movements has an especially strong focus on migrants, since they are the overlap between openness inside and outside. Usually the counter movements also address issues of gender, disability, political correctness, and so on, but these aspects only apply to the inner openness. Through migrants, both perspectives become united, openness inside and outside. And in my opinion, it's not about how long a country is an immigration country or how much experiences a country has with migrants and migration. That seems to be not so important. That's not the central aspect, and that's why I am talking about openness in general. and migration and integration as one part of this openness, an important part, but only one part. So I'll start my analysis with some paradoxical effects of inner openness, of the inner perspective. That's integration, and at the end I will show you some of these paradoxical effects regarding the outside openness, that's migration. But for now I will focus on the perspective inside, first about Germany, but then I will open the view. So, integration in Germany. The integration of migrants is relatively successful in Germany. There was never before a time in German history when integration was as successful as it is today. Integration policy has clearly improved. The opportunities for minorities to participate in society are much better than even 20 or 50 years ago. Regardless of whether we focus on labor market, educational system, living conditions, or the opportunities for political participation, all of that is better than 10, 20, or 30 years ago. But when you take a look at people's perceptions, when you examine the public discourse, you can see that the assessment and evaluation of people concerning integration processes is exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite, and this difference between measurable integration on the one side and the perceived integration on the other side seems to be crucial. If we want to understand the counter movements, we have to understand the perception of integration in general and the difference between measurable and perceived integration in particular. I will point out that difference in the following 4 areas. First, integration policy, then integration processes and their effects. Third, the relationship between integration and racism. And the last point, the perceived discrimination from the perspective of minorities. And in any case, I will talk about expectations we have and differences we make. So, point 1, integration policy. Of course, Germany made many mistakes in the past concerning integration. Wagner talked about that. After World War II, labor was needed to build up the economy. Starting in the 1950s, labor migrants came from throughout the entire Mediterranean region, and these labor recruits were to be uneducated and have no ambitions because they were to focus solely on their given jobs. They were to work hard, but they were not supposed to stay permanently in Germany, and they were definitely not supposed to expect that they would really belong to German society one day. They were referred to as, Wagner said it, Gastarbeiter, guest workers. Ladies and gentlemen, working guests. I don't know any culture in which people make their guests work. And it's not usual, it's not common in Germany. Moreover, these guests in Germany were expected to do very hard manual labor. Very hard manual labor, so one could say they were not really full-fledged guests. They were only guests with regard to their not belonging. Well, the term Gastarbeiter itself makes clear how ill-defined integration policy was in that period, from the 1950s till the 1980s. There was no integration policy. And why should the integration of the Gastarbeiter be supported anyway? They were supposed to remain guests. That was the deal from both sides. But in reality, many stayed and are here to this day. And they received no language courses. We heard it, Germany is really a beautiful language, but it is very difficult in the same time. And they received no language courses, no training, no education, no further education. And for a long time, the children of these guest workers were placed in school classes separate from German children's classes for a long period. It was also very difficult to gain citizenship. It was nearly impossible. Everything which we currently refer to as integration policy did not exist. So that's why we started on a very low level. But no wonder we still have problems today, and in truth, most of these problems can be traced to the mistakes of the past, to the integration policy deficits of that time. Today, it is much better. For example, even refugees can expect language classes, labor market integration, an apartment, education, and training. Refugee children enter in regular classes, and the result is extraordinary. Today, an average adult Syrian refugee who came to Germany in 2015 already speaks better German than many guest workers who have lived in Germany for more than 50 years. In the 1960s and 1970s, I would have given the German integration policy a score of 2 on a scale from 1 to 10. Failed. Today, I would give German integration policy a score of 7 out of 10. That is, of course, much better. But one thing we have to consider is that in the 1970s, integration policy was not seen as important. Integration was a foreign word, largely unknown in word and meaning. Today, integration policy is seen as the most important issue in domestic policy. And the expectations have risen considerably faster than the real improvements. And for an area of policy which has finally become the most important one, a score of 7 points out of 10 is apparently no longer enough. We are Germany. 7 points. That's not enough. The problem, though, is not the situation itself, but rather the discrepancy between expectations and reality. We are talking about a relationship. The expectations rise faster than the reality can deliver, and while real conditions improve, expectations are rising even more quickly, so nobody is really noticing the improvements. That was point 1 about integration policy, so now we are at my second point. The more interesting point 2 addresses integration and its effects, and also our expectations. What exactly do we expect the result of successful integration to be? This question poses a central problem. I believe we have we completely have the wrong idea about what integration is supposed to lead to. There are constant disputes over the definition of integration. There are different concepts, different terms. So we don't only discuss integration, but also inclusion, diversity, participation, equal opportunities, and so on. These terms focus different phenomena and processes, but they all have one same effect. And we don't pay enough attention to this common effect. When integration or inclusion or equal opportunities are successfully implemented, they do not lead to a society which is more harmonious or free from conflict. On the contrary, the central effect of successful integration is actually a higher potential for conflicts. In every case, regardless which term you use, more people are sitting at the table and they all want a piece of the pie. More people are sitting at the table and want a piece of a pie. How is this supposed to lead to fewer conflicts? This idea is either naive and romantic, it's multicultural optimism, or it is hegemonic in the sense of expecting minorities to assimilate. Reality, however, looks different. I always describe the general integration process like this. The first generation, migrants, usually sit on the floor while the established citizens sit at the table. At this stage, the migrants are happy just to be there. They don't raise their voice, they're modest. But the second generation sits at the table and they want a piece of the pie. This is how successful integration leads to higher potential for conflict. The third generation, the grandchildren of the migrants, don't just want a piece of the pie. They want also to have a say in what is ordered. Which pie is coming to the table next? And the potential for conflicts continues to grow in the third generation, because the next step is to decide which recipe is used, the recipe of society. That's why open society, that is indeed what open societies promise, to have a say and to participate. And since a liberal and open immigration country has a new first generation every year, as well as a new second generation every year, as well as a new third generation every year, the situation continues to grow complexity. It will remain full of conflicts. At least the potential for conflicts increases. And that is new in all Western countries. In all Western countries, because openness and participation for all people and real integration for all people is new. It's relatively new. So what kind of conflicts am I talking about? First, conflicts of interest. Well-integrated people express their interests and needs actively and offensive. They organize themselves and work to realize their goals. Second, the resource conflicts. The competition increases in the jobs market, in the educational system, in the housing market, and so on. So these resource conflicts is especially interesting with working class. The third conflicts are conflicts in everyday life. The foreignness starts being seen as more problematic because we see the foreigners everywhere, in all sectors, in all positions, even in the media. It's not only that poor people are, that migrants are poor people. If integration is successful, they are seen everywhere. One example which has been a focus of conflict in Germany, as well as almost every other Western country, is the headscarf, the Muslim headscarf. When I went to school in the 1980s and 1990s, I saw many headscarf-clad women entering and leaving my school every day. But nobody cared. Nobody cared about it. It was okay. But these women were badly integrated. They were not German citizens, spoke hardly any German. It was seen as okay, because these were just cleaning ladies. It wasn't okay anymore when the headscarf-clad women started becoming teachers, educating German children. These conditions made the headscarf into a problem. And I don't want to start a discussion right now about teachers with headscarves. What's relevant to me in this context is that this conflict arose only because the integration process and the participation had been successful. Successful development leads to this conflict. Integration leads to conflicts which didn't exist before and which would not exist at all if no integration had taken place. Integration changes a society. Unsuccessful integration, disintegration, leads to deviance, social problems, crime, of course. But successful integration leads to fundamental change and to conflicts. So this too, what I'm talking about, this creates a problem regarding to the expectations. Our expectations, what the results of integration should be. We have a romantic idea. Which leads me to point 3 and 4. 3. My third point is about the relationship between integration and racism. It's very interesting because people often assume that racism increases when integration is unsuccessful and decreases when integration is successful. This would give racism an indirect justification. And, well, this expectation is an illusion. Imagine once again this image of the table at which more and more people are sitting. If more people are sitting at the table, more people and more diversity, is racism automatically supposed to decrease? It's not plausible. It's not plausible that successful integration automatically reduces racism. Sure, racism often focuses on the idea that a constructed group is not equal to one's own. That's true, but racism becomes especially extreme when it is directed against a group which is strong or becoming stronger. Because that means some of the people sitting at the table are losing privileges. Privileges they had before. Let me give you a few examples to illustrate what I mean. First one, about the Jews in Germany and the German history. It's a history of the most extreme racist excess. The Holocaust, Shoah. But were the Jews systematically excluded and persecuted because they were badly integrated? Speaking bad German or being unemployed? Of course not. On the contrary, Jews were successful in Germany and assimilated in many areas of life. It was partly their real success and partly their presumed success which would help cement their doom. People believed them to be very intelligent and to have good networks. They spoke about Weltjudentum, a worldwide Jewish conspiracy, and the Nazis said the Germans have to stick together in order to have a chance against this elite group, this Jewish elite group. So I don't believe that this contradictory relationship between racism and integration is a distinctly German phenomenon. For another example, let's look at the United States. When did the Tea Party become strong in the United States? When a black man became president, and in the same year, white students became a decreasing proportion of university student bodies. And today, people see it clearly. The Obamas stand perfectly for everything that is important in the United States. They are a dream couple, totally American, attractive, intelligent. It's Hollywood in the White House. And more than the Kennedys, because the Obamas really embody the American dream of moving up in society. And what is even more unbelievable, no scandals. They really seem to love each other. They're just perfect, except the skin color. And to overlook this point would indicate a naive romantic understanding of integration and participation. The same applies to developments in all West European countries, like Germany. So the third example about Germany today. A while ago, I talked to Erich. Erich is 50 years old, nearly 50 years old, and he's a member of the party AfD, Alternative for Germany. That's the German right-wing populist party. So I talked to him, and what bothers him? What makes him angry? He watched the news. the newscaster is Pina Atalay, Dunya Hayali, Ingo Zamperoni, or Linda Zawakis. After all of them, second generation Gastarbeiter kids, children. After that, he watched the most famous detective series in Germany, Tatort, and the new main actress is a woman of Turkish descent. Later on, he wants to laugh, but he will also be very angry because the comedian of Turkish descent on TV was making fun on conservative Germans for half an hour. Erich is very angry because people who he does not regard as German are successful, are rich, famous, have an influence on public opinion. Recipe. If he, as a real German, is doing so badly, how can life be going so well for people he sees as foreigners? Erich hears of Islamist terrorists, and at the same time he constantly sees successful Muslims in the media. Then he hears the term Islamization of Germany or Europe, a term which, similar to Weltjudentum, has the power to mobilize people, to mobilize racism. So Erich starts to become politically active for the first time in his life. And he's an old man. I'm sorry. So Erich does not want well-integrated migrants because he knows what integration means. He does not want any migrants at all. That was already before the refugee crisis in 2015. Since then, since 2015, he believes it's all a conspiracy. And today, he sees the United States, of course, to blame, especially, of course, Obama. Maybe now he is a Trump fan, I don't know, but it is possible. Why am I telling this long anecdote? The relationship between racism and integration is very complex. Racist arguments are directed not only to those sitting on the floor, but also at those sitting at the table. And those sitting at the table are the bigger problem, especially when they aren't modest in their demands and humble in their attitude, but rather wish to be acknowledged as a self-understood part of the society as a whole. Because that means that they are mixing up the recipe. Thus, successful integration can be accompanied by even stronger racism, or at least it can harden the racism already found at the margins of the society. So, at the same time, the chances of minorities to participate in society are growing. I said that before, and now it gets interesting. So, the increasing opportunities for participation are not only an indication that integration measures have improved, they are also an indication that now there is less structural discrimination. And now we arrive at point 4, the perspective of those who are well integrated and participate in society. Thanks to active integration and anti-discrimination policy, discrimination is decreasing measurably in the most important areas of education and employment. Of course, there is still discrimination, but as in the case for other areas, we are moving in the right direction. Compared to 30 or 40 years ago, there is very clearly less discrimination in Germany, as well as in Canada, the most European countries, and in the United States. But strangely enough, we discuss and fight over discrimination as if it had become worse. More people than ever before talk about discrimination they have experienced. So you can guess, again, expectations rise more quickly than any actual improvements in reality in the same time. If a person feels discriminated against, that means this person experiences an action or a comment as illegitimate, unequal treatment. Two people can experience the same situation. For the one person, this can be okay, and for the other, this is a humiliation. What sets them apart is the belief that unequal treatment is legitimate or it is not. People perceive words or actions as illegitimate, as unacceptable, if they believe that they have the right to be equal members of that society. If they don't expect to have an equal position, then unequal treatment is not experienced as illegitimate. So imagine again well-integrated people who are sitting at the table. They want to be perceived as equals, and they have fulfilled certain societal standards for achievement, and now they have expectations regarding what this is supposed to mean for their position in society. That's why they have high expectations regarding participation and belonging. The reality has improved considerably, but real improvements are still more sluggish than the expectations. As we all know, it's much easier to raise expectations than to fulfill or satisfy them. In contrast, whoever sits on the floor is not as well integrated, has fewer chances for participation, and has perhaps faced much worse discrimination in the past. These disadvantaged people do not perceive unequal treatment as discrimination, because for whatever reason they have not developed the expectations, the claim that they should be able to participate equally. And those who sit at the table in an advantaged position are much more sensitive to unequal treatment. We can measure this in many areas. Black US Americans feel more discriminated against the more successful they are. Black people in the United States who are extremely disadvantaged tend to feel less discriminated. For another perspective, we can look at international comparisons. The better the participation opportunities in Europe, they are the best in the Scandinavian countries, the more people complain about discrimination. The worse their opportunities, in many Eastern European countries, they are very bad. The fewer people report discrimination. We can also compare different groups. Women as a group have much better chances to participate in society than, for example, people with disabilities. But women feel more often discriminated against than people with disabilities. And here the last comparison of a group over time. 50 years ago, women felt less discriminated against than today, much less. And nobody can say that women were less discriminated in the 1970s than today. So in all four comparisons, we clearly see a counterintuitive relationship between discriminatory experiences and the perception of those experiences. Because we are not talking about something objective, but rather about something that is interpreted by people. We are observing a relationship between expectations and claims on the one hand and the reality on the other. And the reality of discrimination has improved. That's good news. But the expectations for equal participation have risen more quickly. Also good news. But a discrepancy has developed because the situation has gotten better. One could gain the impression that the situation is quite bad and even worse, but actually it's the opposite. Okay, those were my 4 points. Put all together, and you understand why an increasing number of people summarize the situation as not good, even minorities as not good, because there's a lot of social changing, tensions, conflicts everywhere. The discourse has become more conflictual because the conditions have become better. We see it again and again, expectations versus reality. The discrepancies indicate that we stand before extreme challenge. We achieve our aims, and because of having done so, we are unsatisfied. There are conflicts wherever we are successful. So you know my main thesis. Now, successful integration increases the potential for conflict in a society. I think you will never forget that. And now I'm going to say an extremely important sentence, considering it's the most important sentence in my lecture. It's coming a bit late, I know. Here it is. Conflicts are very, very important. Conflicts are energy. Energy for development, for improvement, for progress. Energy can be something wonderful. Thanks to energy, you can hear me. And we sit together here, and you listen and I'm talking. Conflicts which are managed in a constructive way, that's the important. In a constructive way can bring about wonderful things. Deconstructive ways of dealing with conflicts can lead to disaster. Wars are the result of conflict, but democracy, human rights, environmental protection, humanism, the welfare state, the open society and liberalism, all these things were fought for, and they were always preceded by social conflicts. It all depends on how one deals with them. Conflicts are actually something neutral, like diversity. It is reality, and it all depends on how we deal with them. The constructive management of conflicts lead to social progress and social innovation. That's the history of Europe and North America. So openness within a society means more and more people are sitting at the table. Not only ethnic minorities and people of color, but also women, people with disabilities, LGBT people from lower classes, and so on. The pronoun we, has become bigger. This is very new. Also for the classic immigration countries like Canada and the United States, that this is relatively new, and that means that identities and privileges are renegotiated. That is stressful, but that was the vision after all. And while the vision became reality, there is a counter movement, a backlash. Now, to conclude, I come to the final part of my presentation, the openness outside. As I have already mentioned earlier, I distinguish between openness inside and outside. The openness to the outside means more and more nations are sitting at the table. More and more nations are sitting at the global table. Developing countries and parts of the so-called third world are sitting at the table. And it's the same effect. Privileges are renegotiated. So globally, we can see a contradictory development. A central paradox of globalization is that the West is becoming increasingly more and more important, and in the same time, it's losing its dominance. More and more important on the one hand, less dominant at the other hand. More important and more significant because the growing middle and upper classes in China, India, Russia, and so on, are currently orientated towards the West, the Western lifestyle. And at the same time, the dominance of the Western countries is waning because these other countries I just named are becoming more powerful and more influential. So we see there are similar paradoxical effects regarding openness to the outside. And I believe we are entering a new era because we are beginning to understand what open society really is in practice. We're beginning to understand what kinds of impact an inclusion society has. And we are also starting to understand what globalization means in reality. And all this brings more uncertainty and less security and less orientation. One way of dealing with all this is to reinstate the past, its social closure. This includes returning to religion, nation, ethnic group as increasingly important categories of belonging. That are different kinds of identity-based social closure. We see them everywhere, nearly everywhere. We see the anti-liberal nationalism growing, and maybe these global changes and the changes inside of Western societies are making people particularly angry in those countries which have historically seen themselves as having a right to a dominant position. We see this in countries like France, Great Britain, the United States, and even the Netherlands, that we have this counter-movement, a strong counter-movement. In these countries, one can say, make our nation great again. That's the relevant word, again. And I think Canada does not really carry this belief in their right to dominance. I think you Canadians have the best times right now, so happy you. And Germany, with its particular history and present, is somewhere in between. The populists in Germany are not united, especially concerning the question, which time was the best? The 1960s, the Adenauer era, or times of socialism in Eastern Germany, or the 1930s and 1940s, times of the great Nazi Germany. And of course, we have quite good times right now. So that's all the problems, that are the problems the populists in Germany have. They have no common view on the golden era, but they are united in anti-discrimination. And what we see in all Western countries, a lot of people say something is going totally wrong. We are losing privileges and dominance on the national table, in my terminology, and on the global table as well. The establishment did something wrong. That's why they say people against establishment. And so social closure is an attractive option for those people. We need to fortify our borders, close them. Or as Donald Trump said, I don't know if I can do the move in the right way, I will build a great wall. You know that? And a wall is a physical kind of closure. We had a wall a few steps away from here. And it's common sense in Germany that we don't need and don't want another wall, but a lot of people want closed borders in Germany, but not walls. And Canada needs no wall. Redner said this, you have the Atlantic, the Pacific, the North Pole, and the United States. So that's a privileged situation. If we are honest, we have to keep that in mind. There are very different situations for Canada. It's much easier to regulate migration than for the United States or for the European Union. But nevertheless, a real wall seems to be an attractive solution for many people. And I really do have good friends who love walls. They are lovely people. They are interested in cultures. They are open-minded. They're really lovely people, and they love walls. They are archaeologists. They love to dig up walls from fallen cultures. Building walls, that is a fallen cultures solution. Of course, this solution from fallen cultures will not really help us deal with the many complex issues we see in front of us. And I myself have no idea how we can address them adequately, how we can protect openness and find solutions for the problems. Often the search for the solution is more important than the solution itself. But first we have to understand what is really going on, not acting without understanding or just continue doing more of the same. We have to understand the problem before we can search for the solution. And understanding the problems is what I can do. And well, now you are the happy few that who now know what's going on in our societies, or at least what's going on in my brain. Thank you very much. No discussion?
No,